In the United States, we have the Federal Reserve, that it is not federal and there are no reserves. It's a private bank owned by a consortium of other central banks in Europe. But then those banks are in turn owned by the Bank of International Settlements, and that's in Basel, Switzerland. And you want to talk about a shady organization. The laws of countries and of the world do not apply in this particular building. Nobody can be searched. The people that work there can never be prosecuted for anything. The police are not allowed to pull them over. They're not allowed to inspect them. They're not allowed to ask for their identification. It's really crazy. But the Bank of International Settlements dictate to all of the central banks underneath it. So it's sort of the head of the octopus.
Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report Spotlight. Today's guest is Charlie Robinson. Charlie is the author of The Octopus of Global Control, which goes into detail on how those in positions of power are able to manipulate society for their benefit, why they believe they are entitled to impose their warped worldview of reality on mankind, and how we can break free from their grip. Charlie's book tackles topics such as uncovering the deep state, false flag terror events, the media's role in manufacturing wars, the 9/11 deception, the fraud of central banking, our broken education system, and corrupt medical industry. You can find all his work on facebook.com/The Octopus of Global Control. I'll be putting all the links at the bottom of this video. And I'd like to welcome Charlie to the X22 Report Spotlight. Charlie, welcome to the Spotlight.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
Hey, thanks for being here. And I went through your book, and actually, it was absolutely fantastic. 500 plus pages of everything that you need to know about what is going on in the world with the deep state, with the bankers, with the medical industry, education system. I mean, you name it, you have it in there, especially the 9/11 deception. But let's start off with the topic of the truth. And we can see that Trump is out there. He's calling the corporate media fake news, and, the corporate media is fighting back. And we know the corporate media has control of the narrative. They put out the stories. They tell us what to think. So the truth. What is the truth?
That's a pretty big question. Well, the format of the book, I added quotes from over 500 different people that had some sort of role in the most important events in the world. So let me start with a quote from Stephen Bassett from Paradigm Research Group. And this was one that just jumped out at me that made so much sense. And it's on the topic of the truth. Imagine if the truth was a huge jigsaw puzzle, a big box with 20,000 pieces, and it is the truth, the absolute truth. It is a picture of the world as it really is. You come into this world, you get an education, you're handed this box, and the idea is to put all the pieces together. And if you put the pieces together on this huge table, it will be the truth about the world that you live in. So you set about to do that. All good, a wonderful thing, except there's a problem. It turns out the government that you're living under has made a decision to interfere with this truth process. It's a political decision being made for political reasons to serve the state, almost never the citizens. So the government has taken a whole bunch of those pieces out of your box and has thrown them away. They're missing. Well, that's a problem, but it gets worse. They've grabbed a bunch of pieces from another box, another puzzle, and thrown them into your box, to your puzzle. And now you have to put this thing together with an idea that what you're going to find is the truth. It is an almost impossible situation, and it is extremely effective to serve the state. So here we are. What is the truth? I'll tell you what it's not. It's not anything coming out of the mainstream media. That's for sure. We're talking about industries that have been corrupted for decades. If they get anything right, it's accidental. Turning on the mainstream news these days, I only do it just to get a good laugh or to get an idea of what sort of nonsense they're pushing. So the book for me came about trying to figure out what the truth was, and the first step in that was trying to figure out who was controlling the information and how are we getting it? Obviously, we're getting it from our mainstream media, and that. If you go back to the 60s when the Operation Mockingbird, when the CIA infiltrated all the mainstream media, and they set up, they put people in every newsroom to compromise that news. And they're even, there's quotes of them talking about how, we'll know our disinformation campaign is complete when everything the American people believe is wrong. Well, great. I mean, mission accomplished, I would say. we're so focused on our technology, our phones, get on the internet and the social media and the news and all that stuff. And yet the news itself is filled with total fabrications. I mean, we don't even need to go back all that far. We can just look at what's been happening lately in Syria and find out the truth. Well, you're going to try and pass off that Assad gassed his own people for the third time in a row. I mean, don't they have the decency to at least come up with a new lie for us? It's almost embarrassing. I think, though, lately, it seems like more and more people are starting to come to the understanding that what they see on TV is probably not true. When I was a kid, when I watched the news, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. It was the assumption that what they were telling us was true. These days, my assumption is that what they're telling us is a lie until they prove otherwise. I mean, and it's not as if I'm being, I'm unjustified in this sort of belief. I mean, you remember a couple days after 9/11 on CNN, the guy had the audacity to come on there and say, a hijacker's passport was found a couple blocks from the scene, if you can believe that. No, we can't believe that. How dare you? How dare you try to pass off that garbage as real news? And they wonder why people are waking up to these lies. I mean, the truth, what is the truth? Well, that's the mission that we all sort of have to set out to figure out. So that, and hopefully my book will fill in some of the gaps, but by no means is it the absolute truth. I'm still working on that.
And what's very interesting is that they've been trying to fight this whole thing with, fake news and things like that, because as we can see, Google, Facebook, and the rest, they've been trying to push, fact checkers on us. They've been trying to rate who is trustworthy, and all of it is failing. Why do you think that's failing? Why don't you think people are believing the fact checkers and what they're trying to accomplish here?
It's just another form of deception. I mean, it's so obvious that, the people that Facebook's going to hire 20,000 people to be in charge of keeping the facts straight. I mean, that is straight out of Orwell. That is the Ministry of Truth. I mean, I mean, I don't know if they understand the irony of what they're pushing, that it is quite literally out of the book 1984, what they're proposing. You know what? I'll tell you what, we're adults, most of us that are on Facebook. We'll sort out what the truth is. Thank you very much. Facebook can be a platform, and that's fine. But I don't need them to be the arbiter of what is real and what is fake, especially considering they've been passing off this laughable narrative that $100,000 worth of ads on Facebook swayed the election in favor of Trump because the Russians paid for it. I mean, if that's the case, I would spend $100,000 of advertising on Facebook to sell my book, and then I'd sell 100 million copies. I mean, it's ridiculous but so when Facebook comes out and says that they're going to somehow sort out the truth for us, I mean, give us a break. It's laughable, and it exposes either their arrogance or their complete detachment from reality, that they think that that's actually going to solve some sort of problem. I mean, if you really wanted to get to the bottom of the lies, the problem isn't with the people using Facebook. The problem is with the information that's being pushed through the news organizations who have a presence on Facebook. I mean, we watch that on YouTube, where alternative media sites like yours and others are getting strikes against them for no reason at all, or getting flat out banned and delisted and disappeared, like Mike Adams and places, people like that. And yet they push CNN and MSNBC. Like, all of a sudden those channels come up all the time. I mean, so if they were going to be honest about trying to filter out what's the truth and what's the lies, they would take a step back and understand that, you need those alternative voices. You need that, even if you don't agree with them, even if you're, when Alex Jones gets, attacked for his, his ads, they go after the advertisers. CNN goes after the advertisers. Even if you don't like Alex Jones, you have to stand up for the right that shouldn't be happening, that CNN is crossing its boundaries because he hurt their feelings by calling their Parkland stunt what it was, which was a total fraud. So they go after his advertisers. And like I said, you don't have to like Alex Jones, but you have to embrace the fact that, hey, you're messing with somebody's company here. You're messing with their advertisers, and you're trying to strip them out because you don't like what that person's saying about you. That's a slippery slope. And YouTube hosts a lot of really great channels, and there's a lot of information there. I've listened to your show for years on there, and I like that platform. I don't like where it's headed, though. I feel like they are stepping up and making decisions on what reality is and what the truth is. I mean, look, there's all kinds of things you can find out. If you're taking everything that you read on Facebook or on YouTube literally, that's your problem. You don't need the internet policeman to come in there and straighten that out for you. I mean, some people are going to be idiots, and they're going to, they're going to put videos on there that are completely nonsensical. You don't need to ban them. Just ignore them. It's ridiculous. But the fact that they are actively going after independent media, that is telling. That actually is kind of a good sign for the alternative media. It means that it's working. It means that you're being perceived as a threat by these monolithic organizations, and they're panicking. So although you don't want to get 3 strikes and you're out from YouTube, and you don't want to get kicked off Facebook, it's kind of a badge of honor. It sort of means that you're on the right track.
So who is controlling all of this? I mean, people refer to a group called the Deep State, or they call it the Cabal, the New World Order. Is this the Deep State orchestrating all of this?
I mean, the Deep State is sort of this term that is kind of undefined. Peter Dale Scott came up with it. Dean Henderson, who's a great author, he would say that the Deep State is really more the City of London, not to be confused with London, but the actual banking city of London. This is nothing new. This is sort of if you want to call it the Deep State, it has been around for a long, long time. There's a quote I'll read from J. Edgar Hoover, who is not the nicest guy, but he said, "The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst. It rejects even the assumption that human creatures could expose a philosophy which must ultimately destroy all that is good and decent." So you read that. That's from obviously like in the 60s when J. Edgar Hoover was cross-dressing and spying on everybody. And then you get into, I think a lot of us remember the George H.W. Bush, in my opinion, the worst person on the planet, who was very, very clear about his push for a new world order. And but it's not limited to that. You had Richard Nixon. Each of us has the hope to build a new world order. If you start to look for those videos on the new world order, you'll find that a lot of people in positions of power are talking about it, and they're singing the praises of it. And that should really creep everybody out because they're up to no good. Now, is the new world order in charge of Google and Facebook? Well, I don't know. I mean, they fund DARPA and In-Q-Tel, which is the venture capital arm of DARPA. And those companies were heavily invested in Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and, and things like that. So are they involved in social media? They are in some capacity. Is it, are they controlling it? I don't know. Maybe. I mean, it's part of it depends on user created content and users participating. But I mean, I've seen kind of jokish memes about Facebook winning, like the CIA award for the greatest achievement in CIA's history was to come up with Facebook. And I mean, it was kind of meant as a joke, but it might actually be serious. So I would say that, yes, I would say that the Deep State, or however that is defined, is definitely behind this because and you can tell because it's so popular. It's so in your face. It's so ubiquitous. I mean, you've got social media is the thing now, whereas the internet has been growing over the last 20 years, social media is clearly here to stay, and you can tell it's being compromised. And so when you start to find people getting banned that have alternative voices, well, why would it be banned? Would that be good for business for Facebook? Probably not, because I think they would benefit, or YouTube too. They'd probably benefit by having more channels. So who is telling them to get rid of this? Well, those guys show up at Davos and they show up at Bilderberg and agendas are set at these places. And it may very well be that we will find out years from now that somewhere along, the 2017, 2018 time frame, the word came down, hey, shut those alternative media people up, do what you need to do. 3 strikes and you're out, make it happen, get rid of those because we're tired of them.
So how deep does the deep state go? Are they infiltrating government today?
Yeah, they have been. It's international, so it's not limited to the United States. This is something that is that spans borders. It is not concerned with national sovereignty. You talk about the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and people like that. These people have been putting this plan into place for a long, long time. I mean, in David Rockefeller, he's sort of like, when you think of the deep state, you probably picture either David Rockefeller or Lord Jacob Rothschild, who is most definitely the inspiration for Montgomery Burns from The Simpsons. So David Rockefeller said in his autobiography, this is staggering, this quote, but it is 100% true. He said, for more than a century, ideological extremists at either end of the political spectrum have seized upon well-publicized incidents to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over American political and economic institutions. Some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. Okay, so David Rockefeller is telling you in his autobiography that he stands proud. You call him a globalist, you call him pushing for a one world government. I stand proud of those charges. The only person I've ever known who's been misquoted in their autobiography is Charles Barkley. So I think David Rockefeller probably was not misquoted. So this is a real statement. When he says, I am pushing for a one world government, I stand proud and I'm guilty of that. Perhaps we should listen. So, that this guy has been involved in everything. You talk about media, banking. In the book, I list 8 tentacles of control being military, governmental, covert, physical, financial, media, spiritual, and scientific. And I think I've had people ask, what's the most dangerous? And I think the assumption is that the military control would be the most dangerous, but it's not. The most dangerous of the tentacles is definitely banking. Because it spreads throughout the entire world, and it has been used for centuries to enslave people. I woke up to the reality of this concocted economic slavery by reading John Perkins' book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. And in that book, he describes how the IMF and the World Bank will approach third world countries, in one case, Ecuador, and propose say, we'll loan you the money to build a hydroelectric power plant. And the benefits from this will be that it will generate electricity for your country. The children in your country will have electricity flowing to their homes. They'll be able to learn to read at night. This will all be great. So they say, okay, this sounds good. So they sign on to this loan for this hydroelectric power plant. Money never actually flows to Ecuador. It goes to Halliburton or in Bechtel or one of the large engineering firms that builds the dam. Now, it's built at a price that is automatically not going to pencil out for the country of Ecuador. And that's done by design. So they become economic slaves to this. There's not enough money generated from this to pay off the debt that they've signed on for. And then the IMF and the World Bank use that as leverage to push them to do things that they want them to do. And whether it's vote their way in UN resolutions, whether it's privatizing some of their industry like lumber, fishing, allow them to, allow the U.S. military to install a base there, whatever. It's like a loan shark. So it's this rigged game that puts a country in slavery. Once I saw that, I thought, oh my God, that's horrible. And then you realize this happens over and over again. And now the time I'm reading this book is 2007, and I'm watching what's going on in Iraq. And I'm seeing that we're just destroying this place. And who's rebuilding it while we're destroying it? Halliburton and KBR. And so you just go, this is the same. This is a plan that they're running over and over and over again. Who benefits? The engineering firms and whoever is controlling the IMF and the World Bank. Who loses? The country getting invaded, of course, because there's millions of people dead, usually based on a total lie, which kickstarts the war, which, of course, is the case with Iraq and Afghanistan. And so you understand that, like, yes, the military is there bombing and killing people, but once the military leaves these countries, they're still enslaved, and it's done through the banking system. And so, to me, when I was reading that book, it really made sense to me. It sort of gave me the ability to look at the world, the history of the world, and see where that had been done before, and see how absolutely dangerous that is. And now we see, the United States loves to impose sanctions on countries. And here we've got Iran, and we've got North Korea, and we've got what's the Cuba, the common thread between those three countries that have somehow become the most hated countries as far as we're concerned in America. There's one thing they all have in common. They don't have central banks. And that's a problem for the people that are in control. So the deep state, the New World Order, the people that are controlling this, they use their banks as a form of power and leverage over these countries. And when you find countries that do not have central banks, you better watch out, because you're about to get invaded. You're going to get bombed, because Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya and all these countries didn't have central banks 10 years ago. And guess what happened? They got invaded. So when you look at North Korea, you look at Cuba, you look at Iran, you have to understand that it's coming, and they're going to manufacture evidence. They're going to manufacture a reason to go in there, and it's almost never for anything real. It's always some fake, some false flag, some fake event that kickstarts this, and then in conjunction with the corrupted media, this lie is then sold over and over and over and over again until it just becomes normal that we're in Afghanistan. I mean, you can ask someone on the street, "Hey, why are we in Afghanistan?" And they'll look at you and they'll say, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's such a simple question, but why are we still there? We're still there because the people that are in charge of this planet want it that way. And so I think that for all of us that are sort of learning about this, it's kind of our duty to dig into it, see how much we can understand, and talk to our friends and talk to our family and say, "Hey, listen, I've learned this new, there's something new I've learned, and I think you might be interested to know that." So when I wrote the book, I wrote it because I had destroyed Thanksgiving dinners with bringing up 9/11 and just had the table completely turn on me. And oh God, not this again. So when I wrote the book, my intention was to write it so that people could give it to their friends and families, and they could say, "Listen, I've tried to get through to you about these topics, and we're getting nowhere. Here's a book. Read this. It's funny. We tackle lots of different topics, and there might be one aspect of it that will get through to you." In my case, 9/11, and in particular, Building 7, that woke me up. Oh my God, that's not right. That's not normal. That building shouldn't fall. To someone else, it might be to learn that the Gulf of Tonkin incident never actually happened and that it was a whole lie, and you realize, oh my God, Uncle Bob died in Vietnam, and I can't believe that. So there's always one aspect that will maybe flip the switch, and once that happens, it's over, because you start to dig in and find out if this was a lie, what else was a lie, and that's sort of the rabbit hole that you can fall down into.
I agree. I mean, whatever it takes to wake people up, and normally people get very angry in the beginning because they find out that these things are lies, and they can't handle it. I know I was very angry when I started to learn all these different things about the banking system, about the New World Order, and things like that. And, you get very, very upset. And then you calm down, you start doing some research. But again, your book really lays out a lot of different topics. And I wanted to ask you, do you think the central bank is part of the deep state? Because you mentioned banking, you mentioned, how they go into countries and they said, oh, we're going to set up, this power type of station and it's going to benefit you. And that's what they always do. They always tell you how great it's going to be, but they don't show you the behind the scenes of what's really happening, where we're enslaving these people and they'll always be in debt. So do you think the central bank is part of the deep state, or do they fund the deep state? How are they a part of this?
They're the finance mechanism for the deep state. In the United States, we have the Federal Reserve, which you have gone into in great detail about, that it is not federal and there are no reserves. It's a private bank owned by a consortium of other central banks in Europe. But then those banks are in turn owned by the Bank of International Settlements, and that's in Basel, Switzerland. And you want to talk about a shady organization. That building in Basel, Switzerland, is the rules the laws of countries and of the world do not apply in this particular building. It is crazy. Nobody can be searched. The people that work there can never be prosecuted for anything. The police are not allowed to pull them over. They're not allowed to inspect them. They're not allowed to ask for their identification. It's really crazy. So, that's sort of a side note, just sort of a funny thing about it. But the Bank of International Settlements dictates to all of the central banks underneath it. So it's sort of the head of the octopus, and that is, the financial aspect is absolutely part of it. It's not the only part, but it is part that is needed to run this deep state. Obviously, they have the military. You've got the media as a big part as far as brainwashing or getting people on board with it. And I'd say a separate component of that would be the religious organizations too. Those have been, used for hundreds of years to control people. And it's not to say that every religious organization is bad, but the Catholic Church has paid out $4 billion to settle sexual abuse cases. So there's obviously some sort of systemic problem at the top in that organization that is allowing this or turning a blind eye to this. But yeah, so the central banks are definitely a part of it, definitely a huge part of it, but they're not the only one. It doesn't. It's like a car. It needs all the parts to be working in order to be effective, and they're losing. Some of the parts are breaking down, and like we talked about the media aspect of it, the media is breaking down because people are starting to wake up to it. So I put a quote in one of in the introduction to the book that I thought was really important for people to help them understand where I was going with this. And this is the quote. It says, "There is no transparency. They are pushing a lie to the American people. They lie about weapons of mass destruction. They lie about what we are doing in the Middle East. They lie about false flag events to make us do things we would never, ever do. Basically, they're fear mongers. You have to be afraid. You're ruining the planet. You have to be afraid if you have a weapon. Everyone needs to turn them in or there will be more mass shootings. You have to be afraid of the Islamic State. All these things have been created by the government to trick and scare you into doing things you normally wouldn't do. They're lying. The Islamic State is really a proxy army. The mass shootings are really false flags. Global warming is not happening. It is a lie. They are manipulating the data. The economy is completely manipulated." Now that is from you. That was from the X22 report.
Really?
Yeah, that is from you. And I put that in the introduction because I think it sets the proper context for this, is that just because you wouldn't lie, just because you wouldn't do these things, just because you wouldn't go tell someone that there's a boogeyman around the corner, doesn't mean that they wouldn't. And it's important for us to understand that and to really take a step back and realize that we are dealing with some psychopathic people that have, when it comes to being a psychopath, one of the key traits is a lack of empathy, meaning you just they can't envision what another person's pain would feel like. Now, if you don't have that, if that is removed from your personality, you're freed up to cross lines that most people would never cross. And the people running the show here, they're not worried. They're not concerned about you. As far as they're concerned, the ends justify the means. If they have to, if they have to kill 500,000 Iraqi children, they think the price is worth it, according to Madeleine Albright. I mean, that's a reprehensible statement, but it's so insightful as to how they think. They don't worry about the things that you and I worry about. They're not concerned with things like that. They're psychopathic, and that is, it's tough because if you don't know people that are psychopathic, you would just assume that doesn't happen, that's some sort of like villain from a movie. I don't know any people that are pedophiles. At least I don't think so. Hillary Clinton and her family are surrounded by them, convicted pedophiles. I mean, that seems to be par for the course when you get up into these high levels of government. So one thing that I have had to sort of explain to people is that when looking at the political system in the United States in general, but really probably more in the world as a whole, you don't flow to these high level positions of power without being compromised in some way, shape, or form, because the politicians are not the top of the totem pole here. There are people above them controlling them. Now they will bring these politicians up and have them do their bidding for them because they find whatever their weakness is. Maybe it's that they're narcissistic. Maybe it's that they're pedophiles. Maybe they're just power hungry or whatever. They'll give them whatever it is they find that person needs in order to control them, move them up. You don't get to be the president of the United States without having a ton of skeletons in your closet. And so that's by design. So you have to understand that these people that get up into the Joe Biden level and the Barack Obama level, these people have done something and somebody has the goods on them. Just look at Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, he's a convicted pedophile, but he was known to run brownstone operations to entrap people, getting them on video with underage kids or whatever. So the politics and the way this world is being run is so dirty that I think a lot of people have a hard time dealing with it, or as they start to read a little bit about it, they just want to close the book or turn off their computer and say, you know what, I just can't. It's too dark. It's too dark. And I admit it's dark. My feeling though was that I was going to bring some humor to it in a way that, obviously child rape is not funny, but I injected sort of a weird dark sense of humor into this book as a attempt to sort of keep you going a little bit, to get you through these dark parts because they're necessary. I know some of these things are terrible to think about, but if we're going to get the full story, if we're going to understand how it really works, we need to be honest about how bad things can get, and then make the decision that, okay, this stops now, because in the end, we have the numbers, we have the population, there's so many of us compared to them, and they are allowed to run this planet because we let them. And we have to understand that we do have the control. They'll lead you to believe that we have no control, and that is not true. We do have the control. But the first step of this is to understand how absolutely insane things have gotten, and then make the decision that this is stopping right now.
Yeah, and I think that this whole plan that they haven't deviated from it. I think in their minds that they're still going to continue on with this no matter what. And they might change tactics, they might change their plans a little bit. But in your book, you wrote about the Georgia Guidestones. Many people have heard about this. You said this is the 10 Commandments of the New World Order. And to me, when I read this and I looked at this looks like this is, their plan on a high level on what they want to do. Can you just go over and what their plan is and what they are trying to accomplish?
Sure. The Georgia Guidestones are the 10 Commandments plus Stonehenge plus Waffle House. It is a weird grouping of 20-foot tall, flat-faced stones. Kind of looks a little bit like Stonehenge. It's out in some field in Georgia, and nobody really knows who commissioned them. The name on it is R.C. Christian. So I don't know. A lot of people think it's Ted Turner. Maybe it is because has a ton of money from the Atlanta area, but nobody knows for sure. But the 10 Commandments start for number one ought to be alarming to people. It is maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Okay, that's great if there were only 500 million people on the planet, but there's 7.5 billion people here. So that means that basically 7 out of 8 of us have got to go. Now, I don't know if Ted Turner is offering up his family to be part of that 7 out of 8 that needs to go, because he hypocritically has tons of grandchildren. But they've gone on to say guide reproduction wisely, improving fitness and diversity. Well, that's a lie. Unite humanity with a living new language, rule, passion, faith, tradition, and all things with tempered reason, protect people and nations with fair laws and just courts. One thing you have to understand about not just the Georgia Guidestones, but all of these sort of mission statements of the New World Order, whatever they're telling you, it's the exact opposite. When they come out and say that they want to, treat everyone with compassion, that is not true. That is not what they want. There is a really weird sort of karmic rule that they seem to go by. They go out and they'll tell you what they're going to do. And then if you do nothing to stop them, then that bad karma is on you. They will make announcements of things that they very, very, sort of quietly what they're planning to do. If you do nothing, then they assume that they're fine, that you're fine with what they're planning. The Georgia Guidestones is just one of these things. I mean, if you look back at the Albert Pike memo that he wrote, hundreds of years ago, he lays out a pretty dark future and sort of a plan for humanity. And part of this was talking about engineering wars, the first, and there's questions to whether or not the document is legit or not, but laying out the path for world wars and things like that. You have to understand that there were no such thing. There were no world wars before central banks. Those things are tied together. We've got, the push for World War III is happening right now. I think that we all make this one very big assumption, and I did for a long time, and that is that the United States government is actively trying to avoid World War III. That is an assumption that I do not think we can make. I think the foreign policy of our country and of NATO and some neighboring nations makes a whole lot more sense if you flip that and you say that the assumption is that they are actually trying to get us into World War III, because there are a lot of things that are happening right now that are preventable, from building these missile bases and on Chinese islands, near China, are building THAAD missile bases in South Korea and pointing this, it's for North Korea. Really, it's for China, encircling them. John Pilger has a great movie called The Coming War with China that everyone should watch. It's fantastic. We're antagonizing people, the Syria thing and Israel moving their embassy to Jerusalem and acting surprised when everyone starts, freaking out about that. I mean, this doesn't look like a nation that is set to prevent war. This looks like a nation that is poking every hornet's nest they can find, and then acting surprised when people push back. I mean, this is I think we're heading down a dangerous path, and in one way you can tell that this is sort of a path to destruction is when the mainstream media is in alignment on what they're saying. They're all saying the same thing over and over again. It's Russia, Russia, Russia. Russia's the problem. Russia's not the problem. This is insanity. But watching with mainstream media, which normally should not agree on much of anything, when they all come together on one thing, then that should be a red flag to you. And we see this push, this march towards towards a war with Iran. Oh God. And you put John Bolton in there. And this is a guy who is, on record talking about, I want regime change by 2019 in Iran. Well, why are you putting this guy in a position of power? So you wonder, why is this happening? Well, it's happening because somebody wants it to happen. And, this is the problem in America. It's like our country has been hijacked. It's been hijacked by maniacs and in the government, and it's been hijacked by external forces, other governments that have infiltrated the United States. I mean, we have so many dual Israeli U.S. citizens in Congress. It's terrifying. Not that there's a problem with being from Israel, but I think there's a problem when you have dual citizenship. It certainly puts you in a position to have the potential for a conflict of interest. I think that probably shouldn't be allowed, but you go through the list and you will be stunned to see how many people. So it's as if our government and our foreign policy has gotten away from us, and I think we need to demand that we take it back.
Do you think the deep state, do you think they still have full control of the U.S. and the world?
Yeah, I think they do. But I'm optimistic about some aspects that I feel are maybe slipping away from them. They've always had control of the money system, but I'm liking the concept of cryptos because it seems to throw a monkey wrench in their plan. Whenever you can sort of take a bank out of the equation, I'm in favor of that. I see that as starting to slip away from them. I'm sure they will do whatever they can to control that. I definitely see the mainstream media falling apart. That people that are awake or waking up to the fraud. I think that it is. I think that companies like CNN are dead, and they have nobody to blame but themselves. I mean, they have been at it for years and years, lying to the people, and the people are starting to wake up. I think the false flags that are happening. This is the problem, though. Although I'm optimistic in some aspects. I also understand that as they start to feel things slipping away, they will ramp up what needs to be done. They will ramp. I think the false flags will happen more frequently, and I think they'll be larger. I take no pleasure in saying that. I hope that those things don't happen, but I feel that they will react as an animal that is getting backed into a corner reacts, sort of like it's now or never. This is slipping away from us. We're going to hit you with a bigger 9/11. We're going to hit you with something that whatever it is, if it's an EMP or something whatever it is, whatever happens, understand this. Whatever they're telling you, it's not the truth. That much you can just assume right off the bat. But that is my fear. So on the one hand, I'm optimistic because I feel like we're chipping away at their power structure. On the other hand, I'm fearful because I understand what happens when they start to feel that they're really threatened, and that is they will go over the top with something terrible. I hope that's not the case, but unfortunately, that's the mentality of psychopathic people. They won't just back down and say, I'm going to go away. Look at Hillary Clinton as a prime example. Everybody in the United States should be thinking, why don't you just go away? She can't help herself because she doesn't think she's done anything wrong. She thinks that we need her. And it's not to say that I'm some Trump fan either, because I'm not. But I mean, this psychopathic mentality is sort of encapsulated with like the way Hillary Clinton, comes out and still is making excuses for why she lost. You lost because you're a horrible, horrible person that nobody likes, and you're a flawed candidate, and you lost to Donald Trump. You should be embarrassed. The last thing I would do if I lost to Donald Trump would be show my face in public ever again. I mean, it's just laughable. But that mentality of like feeling like they've done, she's done nothing wrong. I see that from the deep state now, backed into this corner saying, hey, listen, we're gonna impose our will on you. It's going to get bad. I really, really hope that's not the case. But I've watched this for, I've looked back on this for years and years, and there is nothing that is out of that they won't do. That they have no boundaries, and that's a very scary thing.
Yeah, I think you mentioned this in the beginning about the central bank and how they're the financiers of the deep state. I think once, if anyone goes after their funding, I think that's when they'll say, hey, wait a minute, we're not going to let that happen, because once their funding is gone, all their operations, everything that they're doing kind of falls to the wayside, and they won't be able to exist the way they are today. So I think if someone somehow goes after the central banking system, I think that's when they might do something. And it might happen with the collapse of the economy, because very interestingly, the IMF is creating a database going back to 1950 on basically putting together who owes what. And this is kind of odd. Wouldn't you think they already have that?
You would think so. Well, I mean, the idea of the central banks as the enemy is not a new concept. Thomas Jefferson said, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. Now, Thomas Jefferson said that. So we're talking about at least 200 years ago. And he was right. And it's not because he's psychic. It's because he understands the mechanism of central banks. It is, by design, a Ponzi scheme. It cannot be, there's not enough money in the system to pay it back. I always thought it was really weird that you would hear people on TV, Ben Bernanke and Alan Greenspan, people like that, talking about how we need inflation. Inflation's good. And I kept thinking, why is inflation good? Well, it's not good. It's not good for us. It's good for them because it allows them, to pay back pay back the debts with dollars that are worth less. So for them, they want inflation, but it never made any sense to me. And I thought it was very telling years ago when they asked Ben Bernanke if they could take a look at the books, and he said no. And they said, well, why not? And he said, because I don't have to. And so you realize, well, that's in front of Congress. Well, who runs the show? Well, it's not Congress, clearly. It's the banks. And I fear, though, that when the central banks start to feel the power slipping away, they'll trigger something. They always seem to do that. But crypto is an interesting component of that, but it's just one part. I think our awakening, our knowledge and understanding of how this banking system is set up, that's really important, because it might not happen in our generation, but maybe the next generation will understand that, hey, this is a recipe for disaster. They've always hidden that information. I remember going to school and being told that the Federal Reserve was a quasi-public institution, and I never understood what that meant, probably because there's no such thing. It's not a public institution, it's private, and so that made it, once you understand that, I still know people very educated people that are like, no, you're wrong about that. I'm like, I'm not wrong about the fact that the Federal Reserve is a private bank. I know that it goes against everything we've been taught, but it's really the truth. And once you understand that, then you start to pick away and realize, well, if that's true, then what else is true? What else are we being lied to? And the answer is quite a bit. But I think it's important for us to understand that there are amazing things in our future. There's really, really great things out there, and we have so much control. We just have to remember that. We have to make decisions. We have to do not comply. There are a lot of things in this world that we do just on instinct and just by reaction. And we have to realize that we always have the right to say, I do not comply with that. I am not going to allow myself to be shipped off to some foreign country to shoot somebody just because, for some reason that has never been fully explained to me. You get the people coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan with scrambled brains. And for what? What are we doing? I think that maybe living through this generation of seeing these pointless wars, as awful as they are, it might actually turn out to be the thing that undoes the whole system, because people can't explain when they come back from Iraq and Afghanistan what they were doing there. We were fighting for democracy and freedom. Really? Really? Do you really believe that? No, they don't believe that anymore. They understand that that's nonsense. And this might actually, although it's been a horrible generation for us, these pointless wars, it might actually turn out to be the straw that breaks the cabal's back. I certainly hope so.
Charlie, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. How can people see your work and get your book?
You can get the book on Amazon. It's available as a paperback and also as a Kindle. And you can go to my Facebook page, / The Octopus of Global Control.
Thank you once again for being on the Spotlight. I'm going to be putting all the links at the bottom of the video, so it'll be much easier just to click on the link and go over to Facebook and over to Amazon. Charlie, thank you very much for being on the Spotlight.
Thanks, Dave.